Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another in the series, Curating Culture. I'm George Miller, Research Fellow at the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank. And today, our guest is Emeritus Professor, or should I say Professor Emeritus, Rupert Lewis. And he'll be sharing with us on the topic, Amy Jacques Garvey, 1896 to 1973, Black Revolutionary Mothering. Dr. Rupert Lewis is Professor Emeritus of Political Thought in the Department of Government, University of the West Indies, Jamaica. Among his books published in the UWI Press Caribbean biography series are Marcus Garvey in 2018 and Walter Rodney in 2024. He is also author of Walter Rodney's Intellectual and Political Thought and has edited books on George Padmore, the Trinidadian-born Pan-Africanist, and Richard Hart, the Jamaican Marxist. He is a member of Jamaica's National Council on Reparation. He played an important role in the restoration and development of Liberty Hall, the Legacy of Marcus Garvey, working with a team led by Miss Elaine Melbourne, Mr. Vivian Crawford, and Liberty's Hall founding director, Dr. Donna McFarlane. He is also a member of the Council of the Institute of Jamaica and chair of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank. Please take a look at a video clip that we're going to play before I introduce you to Professor Lewis.
And back to you now, 'cause around that time, late 60s, is when you started to live at the residence of Amy Jacques Garvey.
Yes,
Tell us about that.
I started to visit Amy Jacques Garvey from around 67 every week, doing chores for her.
Why?
Well, my mother had told me about Garvey from I was in Port Antonio. I was aware of that. When the body was brought back, I wrote an article for my school magazine on Garvey. So before I went to university, I was aware of and interested in Garvey. So this led me to inquire about his wife, and I went to her home, as was the case with so many other people, to speak with her. So from around 1967, I was in touch with her on a weekly basis. From around 1969, she allowed me to stay in her back room. So I lived there from 69 until her death in July of 1973. And I regard that as my second sabbatical, because...
Professor Lewis, welcome to Curating Culture.
Thank you very much for the invitation and to speak on Amy Jacques Garvey. She was born actually December 31st, 1895. She said a few hours before midnight. And therefore, sometimes people confuse 1895 with 1896. But this is her 130th year. So this is why I felt it necessary to speak to the female side of the Garvey movement, and she certainly reflects that. 300 years of British slavery and colonialism continue to have a huge psychological impact on our sense of who we are, our mentality, and our place in the world. I'm happy to be able to speak on Amy Jacques Garvey in Black History Month. The founder of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the African-American historian who started Black History celebration, was a contributor to Marcus Garvey's Negro World. His now famous book, The Miseducation of the Negro, I first saw in Mrs. Garvey's book collection at her home at 12 Mona Road, Kingston. She not only had read the book, but knew the man. The other historian with whom she knew very well was a man called Joel J.A. Rogers, who deserves to be much better known than he is. He's a Jamaican, born in Westmoreland, migrated to the United States, and wrote another book I saw in Amy Jacques Garvey's library, World's Greatest Men and Women of African Descent, and also 100 Amazing Facts About Black People. He had the distinction of going to Ethiopia during the Italo-Ethiopian War and reporting from the front lines there. So Amy Jacques Garvey's home and her collection of books countered the miseducation. She therefore focused her labor on the miseducation concerning Marcus Garvey and the Garvey movement. An extensive propaganda took place against Garvey in the United States and against Garvey in the Caribbean and in Africa. Her work in the UNIA as a contributing editor of the Negro World newspaper, her role in providing leadership for women and men, instilling self-confidence and pride in a racially degrading society. She stood up alongside the men for rights and justice. A book of her writings has been published under the title Amy Jacques Garvey, Selected Writings from the Negro World for the period 1923 to 1928, edited by Professor Louis J. Parascandola. Let me just quote briefly from two articles she wrote for the Negro World. The first article, Negro World, July 10, 1926. The article is entitled Black is Beautiful, which became a popular slogan during the Black Power era. Amy Jacques Garvey writes, quote, "The urge for whiteness is not just a mental gesture. It is a slavish complex, the remnant of slavery," unquote. This is a constant theme in her writings, and it's a theme that is worrisome even in the 21st century. Not only in the Caribbean, not only in Europe, US, but also in Africa too, where the colonial impact is still there in the social and educational system. Another article that Amy Jacques Garvey wrote in the Negro World that I would like to identify is one called "The Tidal Wave of Oppressed People Beat Against the Color Line." And in this article, she shows her understanding of international relations. She is looking at the emergence of nationalist movements in China and in North Africa and highlighting the fact that there is movement against colonialism. There is the effort towards self-determination and drawing lessons from those struggles for people in Africa and the Caribbean. So she always followed international politics. In her book, Garvey and Garveyism, she writes how, as the eldest child, her father would let her read newspapers and ask her questions about it. Her father she described as someone who had lived in Cuba, spoke fluent Spanish, lived in the United States in Baltimore, and she told me that she was treated like the boy child that the father expected. And that interpretation that she gave is an important observation because she absorbed that sense of herself that nobody was better than her, but also that she was not limited by gender. She, of course, led the campaign for Garvey's release between 1925 and 1927 when he was in Atlanta prison. And she published selected and published Philosophy and Opinions in Volume 1 in 1923 and Volume 2 in 1925. and both volumes were put together in subsequent years. They are in print now in 2026, and as Dr. Julius Garvey, her second son, issued a revised edition of the Philosophy and Opinions, shorter edition in 2021, tuning the selection into issues that are current in the 21st century. My focus, however, is not on her American years, as important as those were, but on her Jamaican years and what I call the creation of a Pan-African family. Family in African societies, this is the essential unit. In Western societies, it is the individual, it is me.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey understood that to a T. And I just wanted to say that she created what I regard as our first Pan-African family. And she did this under very difficult circumstances, and she did it experiencing some differences with her husband, and she was very strong-willed, as he was very strong-willed. But the family interest, or rather I should say, the interest of the children came first. And you'll see this from some of the things that I will write, I will read. Marcus Jr. was born in 1930, and he died in 2020. So he lived for a pretty long time. And this is her description of his birth. On the 17th September, she writes, 1930, our first son was born at home. The maternity nurse in attendance telephoned him the news. He came to see me, to see what the baby looked like, beamed all over his face, and returned to the office, like most proud fathers to say, I have a son. He inserted an announcement in the newspapers of the birth of Marcus Jr. He arranged for and attended the christening at St. Luke's Anglican Church. After that, we received a letter from a branch in Lides, Everton, South Africa, wishing the child God's blessing and stating that he should have an African name. Call him Sepo Musi. Musi means ruler, Sepo, hope, to be free. Out of the presents of money I received for the baby, I bought a Holstein cow heavy in calf. When I told him, he said, why did you? A cow is hard to handle. But said I, you can't borrow a cow. Afterwards, I discovered by tracing a registered letter registered to me that he had instructed the postmistress to hand to his secretary all my registered letters. How much of Junior's gift money he got and used for the organization's work, I never knew. When the cow calved and was going dry, I sold her and engaged a Jersey cow, heavy in calf. But it was rainy season and not wise to bring her down from the hills. In deep distress one day, he came home and borrowed that money. I had to sell the calf and all my ducks and fowls to pay for the cow, as he was unable to return the amount. I just used that quotation to show the husband's very determined approach to the family money being used in the office for good work, political work, but also to demonstrate Emeritus Garvey's management of money. This idea of buying a cow as an investment. She was a shrewd business person. She had property inherited from her father on Mountain View. She had property in the Barbican area and later bought property and built houses in on Mona Road, a duplex. So she was a landlady. That's how she made her money. She never worked for anybody throughout her life. Let me go to the second son now. The second son, Julius, was born in 1933. And he's still alive and very active in the United States, and successfully campaigned for a pardon for his father, which was given by President Biden. I quote Emeritus Garvey: "The night of the 15th and until dawn of the 16th August 1933, Jamaica experienced a cloudburst, torrential rains, accompanied by high winds and fork lightning. Homes were washed away, lives lost, fields flooded, fallen fruits blanketed the ground underneath, battered limbless trees. Water mains burst and devastation was everywhere." Sounds a little like Melissa. Angry nature had added to the misery of the poor and to the ill convenience of the better off people. Into this scene of confusion and distress, our second son arrived that afternoon. His father named him Julius after Caesar and Winston after Churchill. He was round-faced and dark, resembling him. Junior called the baby Chubby. He also was christened at St. Luke's Anglican Church. Final paragraph on this, again on the economics of family. About a month after his birth, a bailiff served me with a summons for over a year's taxes due on the home. I had to attend court in order to make arrangements to pay it. My name was not called until the afternoon sessions, during which time I had to suffer the indignity of waiting in the court's corridor and the discomfiture of a nursing mother. When the baby was about 3 months old, I had to take him to a doctor for vaccination. On the main street of the city, I met an old schoolmate whose greeting was, quote, "I haven't seen you in ages. What are you doing with this little black baby?" The old concept of skin color distinction and the idea of raising one's color by marriage dies hard with our people.
Wow.
I personally don't think if Amy Jakes Garvey had met Garvey in Kingston, she would have married him.
Probably not.
I don't think those circumstances would not have brought them together. It was in New York that she was drawn into the movement and decided to make her own contribution, which she continued for the rest of the life. I turn now to the education of these two boys, and I want to quote from some letters that are at the university, Emory University in Atlanta, letters that she wrote in the 1950s. And then she says, "I'm sorry I would not be able to come to America." She's writing to fellow Garveyites, "as Marcus is taking his intermediate LLB degree next month. He has to be working in the day. He won't be able to get to leave to study at the last minute, as he has been transferred to Commerce and Industry Ministry and piled up with work. So he gets very little sleep at night studying. Julius is to take his higher school's Cambridge exam end of November to December. There is no one in the apartment but us. I could not leave them at this time. They only have me and no financial backing to reach the heights to which their brains direct them. Education is very expensive here and in England." End quotation. I should indicate, before going to the 1950s, which is 11 years or so after Garvey had died, that both Marcus Garvey and Amy Jakes left Jamaica around 1935 to go to London. However, in 1938, Marcus came down with an arthritic condition. And she decided that the best thing was for her to go back home. It was a good decision because she had stayed in London when the war started 39-40, she would not have been able to travel. But she left at a time when Marcus was traveling. And when he came back, she had left. Obviously, they had a disagreement about the return to Jamaica. And that was a major issue in their relationship. He maintained correspondence with the boys, but you could see that he was still hurt by her departure. So I raise these things because this is the this is the individual personal background that informs the platform statements that we make, because we have to live together, we have our differences, but Amy Jacques was faced, particularly after his death, with how do I make the family work? So education was a critical issue for her. Marcus went to Calabar High School. Julius went to Wolmer's Boys School. Amy herself had been to Wolmer's as a girl. This is 1951 letter. Now about the boys. Marcus is not content with one degree. He had gotten a degree at around age 18 or so, that of BA. But he has decided to take law, so he wants a degree in that too. He has registered to take the intermediate LLB examination in September. His handicap is lack of funds, as he will have to go to England for 3 years to read for the bar, which is different from the degree in law. In registering at any of the inns, he has to pay £160 before he leaves. So that is the rub, and so on, and she goes on. Julius Winston is to take his higher school exams in November. He's doing physics and chemistry. I cannot keep him any longer in school after that, so he'll have to go and work. This is the time he wants money to go to the university here to further his studies and take his BSc. To summarize their education, Marcus Jr. decided law after finishing was not what he wanted. He wanted to become an engineer. So he returned to Jamaica, studied physics, maths, got a master's, graduate degree in physics, and later became an engineer working on fiber optics technology in the 1980s in the United States. Julius went to McGill University, became a cardiac surgeon. So she, as a single mother, managed the operation of those boys and was able to maintain them and instill in them the values she had been writing about. It is one thing for you to be being an advocate for Pan-Africanism, but it's another thing for it to be part of how you bring up your own children in terms of the values. And it certainly stuck with those boys. I mentioned the weather, again, because we have a background of Melissa. I wanted to mention a hurricane which I experienced as a child, a young child, Hurricane Charlie. And this is Amy Jacques Garvey with Hurricane Charlie that hit her, I think, when she was living on Mountain View. Part of roof gone, no lights, getting water now but poor quality. We are safe but clothing wet, also books and some furniture. Please rush on package for Mr. Wolf. She was able to organize some 58 packages of clothing, shoes, and food for Garveyites who had suffered. So this is normal life. This is Jamaica. This is the inclemency, the weather situation, which she had to deal with. I want to turn now to her politics, and she wrote a letter to the then President General of the UNIA, a man called Thomas Harvey, in 1953. And here she said that for years Marcus Garvey, and I quote, has purposely decentralized Garveyism, as it could not be contained in the UNIA alone, as big powers were always out to destroy it by using the officers and propagandizing the membership. So since his deportation from America, he always organized and subsidized many different groups of students, seamen, traders, to carry out the work of Garvey. And Robert Hill, in the 2 documentary volumes on Africa, speaks to the underground work of the Garveyites in parts of Africa where the UNIA was proscribed or banned, where the Negro girl, if you had it, you could be imprisoned, and therefore work in terms of looking at the history of the Garvey movement. One also has to take into account this notion of a decentralized movement, that it was not all big parades in New York City, it was not all big meetings, it was not all the kind of images that exist on the internet about Garvey. It was also work that was done underground, work by seamen, work by ex-soldiers. There's a whole documentation that Robert Hill has done, which enables us to understand the overground movement, which we are all familiar with, but also the underground movement. And part of Amy Jacques Garvey, what she did in the 50s and the 60s, was she developed what is called the African Study Circle. Circles of people who were brought together in study groups to discuss the unfolding anti-colonial struggles that were taking place in Africa in the period prior to independence. So this sense of what are the appropriate forms and mechanisms that are relevant to another generation was a factor that she understood very well and exercised a great deal of flexibility. Her correspondence also with, we know that Garvey had big issues with W.E. Du Bois. But by the 1940s, she and W.B. Du Bois were in correspondence because the situation after the war was one in which developing countries, India got independence in 1947. There was a big clamor for what around the Atlantic Charter, the post-World War II settlement, that the Atlantic Charter should reaffirm the right to self-determination. So people with whom her husband had quarreled, that doesn't mean that they were her enemies at that time because the situation had changed. So she had correspondence with Nnamdi Azikiwe, who rose to leadership in Nigeria at independence, with George Padmore, the Trinidadian, with a whole range of people that she maintained contact with in the United States. And I remember when West Indians were coming back from Cuba, from Panama, from Costa Rica, sometimes to visit, sometimes to settle, they would all come to her home because she had developed this global network of contacts who relied on her for advice and counsel. So a creative response to changing circumstances. She was very much in favor of independence in the Caribbean, but she belonged to that generation of West Indians who saw Caribbean unity as the way forward. That was where she stood politically. Let me conclude now by saying that the 60s and 70s, I was a research assistant to her. And among the books that she helped to produce, some of them came out after her death, but she was working on them. And I give you Marcus Garvey and the Vision of Africa, which she edited with the African-American historian John Henry Clark. That came out in 1974. She died in 1973. More Philosophy and Opinions, Volume 3, which she edited along with Professor Essien Udom of Nigeria. That came out in 1977. Was dedicated to Kwame Nkrumah, Malcolm X, and Edward Blyden. Now, the wave of publications that she was able to edit in the 60s and 70s was due to the impact of the Black Power and Civil Rights movement. And American publishers became interested in her work. However, when Garvey and Garveyism was first published, she had to borrow money. She wrote Garvey and Garveyism in 1958, but had to borrow money, and it wasn't published until 1963-64. And then the Americans took it up after the Black Power era around the early 1970s. They got an American edition. There's one biography of Amy Jacques Garvey called The Veiled Garvey by Professor Hewlett Taylor on the life and times on Amy Jacques Garvey. And I wanted to mention another book, the book by Natanya Duncan, An Efficient Womanhood, Women and the Making of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Because what Professor Duncan has done is to look at the ordinary women in the organization and the work that they did to make the movement thrive. By the 1930s, women were the majority of the members and supporters of the Garvey movement. And it is they who really gave the strength and the support. But let me conclude by referencing ACIJ JMB. I started up by saying that miseducation is what ACIJ JMB is trying to combat. Miseducation is why African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica was created in the 70s and Jamaica Memory Bank in the 1980s. Both major political parties recognized in some shape or form that you had to have institutions which corrected the colonial myths and lies. And once you have that in your mind, then you appreciate the work that is being done by the ACIJ JMB and commend you and others to keep up the work, because it's part of a bigger tradition of which Amy Jacques Garvey was a pioneer.
Thank you, Professor Lewis. That was a very fruitful discussion. We're going to take a look at another video now before we go into the questions from online. The producer will get those. But Prof. Lewis, I am full. I am full from what you said. And now I understand your thesis, if I should call it that, Black Revolutionary Mothering. Mm-hmm. And you said something that caused me to start to think, about the matriarch. You're always hearing about African families and the role of the matriarch. Mm-hmm. And Amy Jacques Garvey is not someone that is often spoken about, especially in the shadows of Marcus Messiah Garvey. But those two stories that you read from her book about when she was with child and how she documents, you know, the education of her child. It to me is very peculiar how she would focus on their education and not even mention Garvey in it. You know, in terms of even the influence. And I'm thinking, but Julius sound as ambitious as the father. I mean, the other one, you finish 1 degree law and then you want to the engineering. So this mothering, whether Garvey was there or not, helped to inculcate and reinforce that foundation. You know, I was speaking with a co-worker in the office and he said to me, some people said that, you know, Marcus Garvey was bossy. And I was like, he was not bossy. It was just uncommon to see the black man with such confidence and being such bold, you know, owning himself and presenting himself. And this was exactly what Amy continued through her sons. So it very good presentation, very good. So we are going to take a look at the video now and then we'll take the questions from online.
That's black power, but that's baloney. That is hogwash. That's a damn lie.
But Jamaica wasn't ready to elect a black leader.
When you hear that Jamaica, independent Jamaica, has a black prime minister, you say, well, those people are in power. That's black power, but that's baloney. That is hogwash. That's a damn lie.
But Jamaica wasn't ready to elect a black leader.
Comments on that last video?
Yes,
before
that's
we get
the last video. That is her in her last years.
Okay.
So in her last years, she was, you have to remember that with the banning of books by black people in the 60s, in 1968, a whole list of black books were banned. So she was extremely upset at that. Because Jamaica had Garvey as a national hero. And for example, banning the Malcolm X autobiography was simply not something that she could condone because Malcolm X's mother and father were Garveyites in Michigan and in Canada. And, you know, so this was like you're banning the legacy of the Garvey movement. So it should be pointed out that she refused to take the pension that the government of Michael Manley offered her when they introduced it. The cabinet wrote a lovely letter to her, but she said, no, I don't want any pension from government. Taxpayers' money must go to deal with the issues that the population faces. So a person of great principle and independent and strong in her will. Anybody, I regard her as a mother. My mother had died earlier on, and I married out of her home.
Wow.
I married my wife because my wife, Maureen Walter Lewis, both of us had organized in January of 1973, the international conference, the first international conference at the University of West Indies on Marcus Garvey. Was organized by the African Studies Association, the West Indies. So by July she had died, but she was very pleased with the involvement of the university with the Garvey legacy. So I say revolutionary mothering because it also affected my own life.
Right, a mother to you as well.
A mother to me as well.
Okay. And she's very big on education. And I can imagine how pleased she would be that the university, the zenith of our education system. I have a question here for you from Atalawa. I cannot read this name. You know yourself. It says, Dr. Lewis, why do you think opposition to Papa Garvey, like Du Bois and Padmore, were willing to correspond with Amy Garvey? Historical circumstances or realizations?
Historical circumstances after the war, but also a softening of attitude. I mean, but Padmore had, all of them had been, so after Garvey, Sailor James, everybody had been criticizing. Sailor James wrote in praise of Garvey. So I think they came around to realize none of the others who criticized it led a mass movement.
Right.
And when you lead a mass movement as he did, that's a rare thing. It's, if you're talking about 5-6 million people in the 1920s, with a global impact. So I think they came into a better understanding as time went by after his death of his significance.
Right, because a lot of people don't know that the UNIA was like an international organization right across the Caribbean, in the UK, in foreign countries that we don't even talk about every day. When I read your book, Marcus Garvey, from the Caribbean biography series, I was like, wow, this is big. And so Amy Jacques really understood what she was doing in terms of making networks and in terms of continuing the legacy of the philosophy of Garvey even after his death. So many books could be published after that. And as you said, education is what ACIJ is about. And this is the type of information we want to be propagated in the schools, especially in a time like this. So one question I have for you, concerning Amy Jacques. You mentioned that she did quotes. Did she also write poems? Because I know the arts is one way that we can reach our young people.
No, I don't know of her writing poems. I don't think she was a poetically minded person.
Well,
matter of fact, her husband is the one who was more creative.
Yeah, I know
in that
Garvey
year,
have
but
poems.
I have never found any poem by her. Husband had the artistic temperament. She was very matter of fact, very business-like, very applied to her work.
Okay.
So this is not to say that she doesn't appreciate the arts. She did, but I don't have any evidence of her in that way.
The two pieces that you read sounded very creative and poetic and artistic. The way she described the torrential rains coming down. It painted a picture. It was very descriptive.
Yeah, thanks for raising the quotations, because in reading Garvey and Garveyism, sometimes how she inserts these personal stories into what is a political, historical narrative indicates that there is more of her that could have emerged in another kind of book, writing from her perspective.
Exactly.
Because it's a different perspective from the male and the male Marcus's perspective. It's a different perspective from even her son's perspective, because if I may just add a reflection on Marcus Jr., who is no longer with us. He had a temper. He had a temper. I don't want to go into too much of that, but it was an anger that came from what he saw around him. He had got into fights in England with the white gangs, Teddy boys, right? I mean, he was physically very fit, although he had this arthritic condition, and he would fight you, physically fight you. Chubby, the second boy, has a different temperament altogether. So in that sense, the mother's temperament is a blend of the two. But since she considered herself, she had a very masculine sense of herself.
She certainly seemed that way in that last video.
Masculine sense of herself.
Certainly.
And I should point out that she wasn't a kitchen person. Her sister, her younger sister, Ida Repole, used to bring food for her. So most she did, warm up the food, eat it, get back to her work. So it gives you an idea of how her daily life was conducted. And her focus on what task she had set herself.
I mean, earlier we had a short conversation about knowledge, passing on the continuity of the knowledge. Amy seemed to have been focused more on the dissemination of the knowledge and the importance of the education in the house, because many times, you know, they say pass and christening pitney first, but many times what you are advocating for outside of the house and with other children, you can get your children to do it. But we didn't see that with her. We saw her influence across continents, across the population. How could someone like Amy be an inspiration to young girls in Jamaica today?
Well,
You know?
a huge inspiration. Let me just point to, I mentioned books, right? But also want to say the images that she had in the home. She had a bust of Garvey that had been carved by the African-American sculptress Augusta Savage. So the images in the home are also images of Black people.
Okay.
So it's, if you look at most homes in the 50s, 60s, you're not going to find that. Right? Those images would have been white images of one kind or the other. The question of her thing on young girls, she wrote a lot about women in her journalism, about nurturing, about bringing children into the world and how you have to prepare for that, because that is going to be 2 decades or more of your life. You have to prepare for that. It's both an emotional, a psychological, and an economic job. But this sense that the colonial education of the time needed to be changed, that you had to self-educate, that self-reliance was the way to go. So there is everything to support. I mean, she had a good relationship with her husband's wife, with her son's wives, and their children, who would visit from time to time, particularly Dr. Julius. So there is, although I've probably painted a picture of someone who is too matter of fact, she was a nurturer.
Yes, it seemed like the family
Nurturing was there as a
the most
strong
important
part of what she did. But she was also concerned that women should not hide their talent, and their talent should be given the full venting, the full expression. So there is, without, at that time, feminism was not a part of
that was
the
going
vocabulary.
to be my next question. Where does she fall in the feminist arena?
Well, you see, one of the things about the point that Natanya Duncan makes,
the efficient womanhood.
Efficient womanhood embraces a notion of male-female equality, which was instilled in the movement, and she goes into it in greater detail to distinguish it from the white notions of feminism. So she is talking and looking more at issues of partnership, male-female partnership, but she's seeing that within an equitable relationship. So what the younger black scholar, Nathaniel Duncan, is a Jamaican American, what they're doing is enabling us to understand how notions of manhood and womanhood were being developed within the Garvey movement.
Right.
Which notions can be drawn on in place of and complementary to the current Western notions of feminism. That there are intellectual traditions that we can draw on to talk to our young people about who they are, where they are coming from, and what they can become.
Right. Thank you for that. I'm getting the signal to wrap, but I must say that I'm glad you spoke about the feminism in the white sphere and also among Africans, because she was very pro-family. It's not the burning of the bra feminist. She seemed to have enjoyed raising her children, you know, and she had a plan for them to say, this is what this one is going to do. And she supported them because you say she didn't work for anybody. All her income came from real estate, which showed you that she was a shrewd business person. And I'm sure Nathaniel Duncan book would talk about some of those skills. She also didn't seem to be complaining about the times when Garvey would come and take the family money to doing the business, because she seemed to have been all on board to get this message out, and she might have just seen that as playing her part. It wasn't her money or her cow, it was the cow, and at that time, and she didn't hint that there was any argument about the gifts that came, but you know that some of this money is going to go into the business, into the office, and it just went because there's a bigger goal, which is to keep the family and to keep the message and to keep this information about Black identity and Black philosophy going ahead. Let me see if we can take one last comment or question before we wrap up. I see someone asked about after Garvey passed, how did Amy, what was her operation like after that in terms of the UNIA?
Well, she was a major advisor to the President Generals who succeeded Garvey. And one of the letters I wrote, I quoted from Thomas, her corresponding with Thomas Harvey concerning the UNIA, concerning the children and so on. And she would go up to the States and visit and speak. So she was fully on board with the organization.
Still involved.
But as she said, the American field, the Caribbean field, the African field were distinct areas of work. And it is the circumstances in the particular field that determined how you should and could operate, how effective you could be, bearing in mind the circumstances which obtained there. So she had a very good relationship with the UNIA leadership. And Marcus Jr., in his later years, when he lived in the United States, himself became a President General of the UNIA. So the family was very much, the family was inseparable from the organization.
Very good, thank you. Well, she certainly reminds me of Rita Marley and the work she's done with the Bob Marley Foundation. I know it's not Women's Month, but when we look at the work of these women with these great men, you know, we start to connect the dots. Well, we certainly thank your audience for joining us on Curating Culture and for staying with us. I'd like to encourage you to continue to follow us at ACIJ JMB on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook, on TikTok, and on X. We're asking you to look out for our documentaries that will be aired throughout the rest of the month of February and through March. Thank you for staying with us. The next time, join us on Curating Culture, where we curate to educate. Thank you.
Okay.